And we are going to dive into what the band is going through. But first, we're going to do a quick by the numbers. Now, the Eagles do have another album on this list. It is their first album, just titled Eagles, that is on this list. So I'm not trying to exhaust all of the by the numbers for this. So we're going to do a quick by the numbers here. The first number is 2 out of 3, which is the number of Eagles albums that are in the top 3 best-selling albums in the United States of America of all time. They own the number 1 and the number 3 spot of the best-selling albums in the U.S. of all time.
Wow.
And is this one of them?
This is one of them. This is the 3rd best-selling album in the U.S. of all time.
Jesus.
The number 1 best-selling album in the U.S. of all time was their greatest hits album that was released right before this. So,
okay. Well,
yeah,
I guess we're going to talk more about it, but I think that's.
Did they have some hustle to like move vinyl?
dude, I don't even know. I think it just hit at a time where like a whole bunch of people just finished dentistry school or something like that.
I need my music with no edge.
So 26, the number of times that this album went platinum in the US, 26 million copies in the US alone.
Jesus.
For the record, their compilation greatest hits albums went 38 times platinum in the US, which is just insane. And 1 week is how long it took Hotel California to go platinum. It was released December 8th of 1976, and it went platinum before the year even ended. It went platinum in the same month it was released, which is absolutely insane. And then the last number that I'm going to put is just basically every goddamn one, which is the number of chords that a beginning guitar player knows that is in the intro to Hotel California. I'm sure you all remember learning how to play Hotel California when you were like originally learning how to play the guitar.
Yeah.
And F sharp minor 7 was like, you were like, oh yeah, I got an F sharp 7 in here. This is great. But
it does break all the rules. It breaks the 3-chord pattern rules, and it breaks out of key, and it's it is a really nice chord progression.
It's a great chord progression. For the people who are not familiar with playing an instrument, there's A, B, C, D, E, F, and G. Those are the chord possibilities. And in any key, you're going to have an A, or like a B flat might be in there, but you're not really going to have a B flat and a B in the same key. So really there's just A, B, C, D, E, F, and G. And in the beginning of Hotel California, it's a B minor, F sharp 7, A, E, G, D, E minor, F sharp 7 again. So you basically have all the chords except for C are in that intro. And it really does.
I did a really thorough breakdown of this. If we want to get to it now, or do you want me to save it?
Let's save it for the song. We'll save it for the song. Yeah.
Can I just say, because I feel like I already came in hot on the Eagles, and you implied it with their record sales, which are impressive by anyone's metric, that I have to immediately give them credit for being a band that kind of got popular on one style of music and transitioned into having hits in another style of music. Hotel California is one example, but I think you could argue the Life in the Fast Lane mode of the Eagles is also a pretty big departure from some of their earlier hits before Hotel California. So, we just like to, I think it's important to give credit where credit's due. That's a cool thing for artists to do, even if I don't like it.
Absolutely. And I will say that my week was better than I thought it was going to be after my first listen through of the album. I did have that same thing with you, Rob, where it was a come down. I listened to it. I loved it at first. Kind of had a little bit of come down afterwards. I am hoping that you, dear listeners, do not have a come down after listening to this episode and listening to other episodes of ours. We really do try to put some quality product out there for you guys to hear. And we really appreciate, we look at our listener numbers. They're going up every week. Very happy about that. If you want to write a review, give us 4 or 5 stars, whatever, we would absolutely love that. We do have a Patreon. We've been seeing people signing up for our Patreon. We really appreciate that. We put a ton of work and a ton of effort into doing the research to try to give you guys more context on some of these classic albums so that you can sound like the biggest know-it-all jackass at the next dinner party when somebody pops on an album and you can just
Completely
bust out some
insufferable.
facts. Yes, just insufferable, but right. That's the important part.
There you go.
Insufferable,
Yes,
but
yes.
correct. As to say, you're not wrong, Walter. You're just an asshole. And if you want to go ahead and join our Patreon, we certainly would appreciate that. Buy us a beer. It certainly helps when we're doing that late night research to have a few brews to lubricate the process. And the last thing is we have some t-shirts. We've been seeing some people buying our t-shirts, which is fantastic. Get that 1001 Album Complaints t-shirt. Show everybody that you care so much about music that you're willing to listen to an hour and a half long podcast about a 37-minute long album just so that you can know everything there is to know about it.
I just want to point out, I recently was at an adult dinner party and I had that moment you're talking about, and I just got blank stares. I can't remember what factoid I dropped on some unsuspecting listener.
Did you lead in with actually?
they made the mistake of mentioning someone we had covered on the podcast, and I had at it.
It's quite satisfying, and yet you also do get the looks of like, what the fuck is wrong with you?
Actually, I had a conversation with somebody today. I wasn't on this podcast. I'm not trying to bounce around. When you guys covered the band, it was The Weight on the track list?
Yes.
Yeah.
Is that a live vocal take with drums? Did that come up?
That didn't come up. I actually don't have the answer to that. So, God damn
okay, I
it,
was just
Phil.
yeah.
Way to out asshole the asshole.
All right, we can move on.
All righty. Yes, because I actually have a lot of background on the Eagles. So we're going to dive right now into the background of the Eagles leading up to the artist. And the story of the Eagles starts, as every good story does, with Bob Seger. Bob Seger, born in 1945, a legend of the Detroit scene, pioneering a Detroit sound that combined blues and rock. He basically created music that was the best version of a local dive bar rock band. He is a killer. If you're not familiar with Bob Seger, congratulations, you get to become familiar with Bob Seger. That's a great thing to have in your life. I wish I could wipe the slate clean on Bob Seger and listen to it with fresh ears.
Well, specifically the old Bob Seger, just to be clear, because I think he's been unfairly maligned by the Like a Rock era of
the GMC truck era.
Yes. Like a Rock. I like Against the Wind.
It's a good
nothing wrong with any of that shit.
They're good.
Good songs.
They're well-written songs. I'm simply suggesting to the uninitiated, go back and listen to Live Bullet. Like, start there.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. So Seger, he's playing all around Detroit in the 60s. He's playing in the 70s. He is like the regional, like local rock hero. And the great thing about it is that there is this kind of burgeoning Detroit rock and roll scene that's going on, which Detroit has the Motown lineage. And so clearly there was a whole lot of Motown sound going on, but people were taking Motown, mixing it with this kind of rock scene that was emerging there and coming up with a great new sound. So Seger, he's killing it in Detroit regionally all throughout the 60s and 70s. He eventually breaks out into the national spotlight in 68, signs with Capitol Records, releases the debut album of his band, the Bob Seger System, which the balls in this man to name his band the Bob Seger System. I love this.
Pretty badass.
Yeah.
But they released their debut album, Ramblin' Gamblin' Man. And the title track of this album features an artist that Seger had come to know from the local scene, and that is a man named Glenn Frey. Glenn Frey was also born in Detroit in 48, so he's a little bit younger than Seger. From an early age, he's steeped in music. He starts playing piano at 5. He learns the guitar shortly thereafter. He's influenced by this really vibrant music scene that's going on in Detroit, led by guys like Seger, and he is really into it, completely enamored with the scene. He starts joining different different bands, joins a band called the Subterraneans while he's still in high school. As soon as he graduates from high school, which is 1966, he joins a band called The Four of Us. That is where he credits learning how to sing 4 and 3-part harmony, which, as we talked about before, you hear a band like the Eagles singing 4-part harmony. And you're just like, oh yeah, that's just like 4-part harmony. It's really not easy to do that.
It's pretty
have
much
to Cut
impossible.
your teeth. You got to cut your teeth doing that. You don't just walk into the studio and that shit happens. You have to know what you're doing with that. And so he gets this musical education playing in this band, The Four of Us. He is in that band for about a year, leaves, and he forms a band called the Mushrooms in 1967. And they're playing all over the Detroit region, and that is where he eventually catches the eye of Bob Seger. Now, Seger had just started a label called Hideout Records. They signed the Mushrooms. Seger actually writes and produces their first single called Such a Lovely Child. He's impressed with Fry, and he thinks that, hey, you should come and play with me. I would really love you to play on my album. I actually want you to join my band. So he ends up coming and playing on Ramblin' Gamblin' Man, the title track of his first album. And bear in mind, Fry is just 19 years old at the time. And he is like, this is fucking awesome. I'm on this like local legend, a guy I've looked up to for my entire time coming up through the music scene. I'm on the title track of his album. I'm going to join his band full time. This is fantastic. Fry's mom puts the kibosh on him joining Bob Seger's band permanently because they got caught smoking weed together. And she's like, he's a bad influence. You
He's
can't.
19 now?
He's 19. Yes.
Okay.
Night
All right.
moves.
Yeah. That song is clearly about cocaine. No, I'm just kidding. The song is about having sex while on cocaine. So basically, Mama says he can't join the band, but he is prominently featured on one of his tracks. And for many musicians, that would be the pinnacle of their career. But he has other ideas. Glenn Frey has some other ideas. Mostly that he wants to reconnect with his ex-girlfriend who has moved to LA and tried to get her music career off the ground. So 1969 rolls around. He packs up his stuff, moves to LA with the hopes of reconnecting with his ex-girlfriend. And 3 weeks later, he's back in Detroit because that did not go as planned. Apparently did not pan out. But while he was there, he met this guy named J.D. Souther. And he's like, you know what? Fuck this. Detroit sucks. LA is where it's at. I got to imagine that he came back to Detroit and it was wintertime. And he was like, I was just in LA and there were women walking around in bikinis. And now I'm back in Detroit and everybody's got parkas on and the factory's laying people off. I got to get back to LA. This is where it is happening. And so he basically says, all right, I'm going to give it another try. He moves back to LA and he starts a duo with J.D. Souther, who's like another singer-songwriter guy. They form a band called Long Branch Penny Whistle. And my parentheses on there in my note is stupid name, because that's a stupid fucking name.
That's pretty stupid.
Yeah. They have like a tiny amount of success. They get signed to a record label called Amos Records. They release an album, but they're super poor. They're not doing well. He's living in a crappy apartment building. He happens to also live directly above one Jackson Browne at the time. And Jackson Browne is another singer-songwriter. He's writing a bunch of stuff. And Glenn Frey says that during that time, he actually learned a whole lot about songwriting from Jackson Browne because he would hear the evolution of Jackson Browne's songs
wow.
as he's working on them, like coming up through his floor. It's like, oh, wow, you put that part in. Oh, wow, you changed that part. Oh, that's so much better. That flows so much better. So he was sort of like by osmosis getting this songwriting clinic from Jackson Browne, who I'm not a gigantic Jackson Browne fan, but he's a good songwriter.
Sure.
Well, he wrote
With a
one of the
handful of
early
tunes, I know.
Eagles hits.
Yeah.
Yes, yes. Well, clearly they had a friendship developed at that time as well. Two musicians, poor as shit, living together, no jobs, probably not doing anything really except for putting out unappreciated albums at the time. So Glenn Frey is in this guitar duo signed to Amos Records, and in 1970, through the record label, he is introduced to the drummer of another band on Amos Records. This band is called Shiloh, and the drummer of that band is one Don Henley.
Cooler name for a band, I think.
It is a
than
cooler
the
name
other
for
one.
a band.
Yeah.
Well, we'll get to how they got to that, because
All
the
right.
story of Don Henley and Shiloh begins as all great stories do with Kenny Rogers. I'm
Drop a
kind
few
of
more
kidding.
names.
Not really kidding.
another rambling gambling man, eh?
Yes,
Right, you're right.
exactly. So basically, Don Henley, he's born in Texas in 1947. He grew up in a painfully small town of Linden, Texas, a place that to this day has a population of less than 2,000 people.
Jesus.
So, middle of goddamn nowhere. You're living in Texas in the middle of goddamn nowhere. You're in high school. What do you want to do? You want to do what all Texas high schoolers want to do and play football. And Don decides, yeah, he wants to play football. The only problem is that he's not a big guy. He eventually tops out at 5'10", but he's like a skinny, tiny kid. And he plays for the football team, but eventually he gets cut. And the coach basically says, listen, kid, you're never going to play football. You should join the band. And I think the coach thought it was like a diss, but like, as we said, your podiatrist office will never be the same after Don Henley decided to join the band and take up the drums. So basically, it's 1963. Henley is a drummer now. He's in high school. He becomes a founding member of a band. They're a Dixieland band. They're called the Four Speeds. They almost immediately changed their name to Felicity in 1964. So Henley is 17 years old in 1964. So he's still in high school, but he's got this band Felicity. They are grinding it out on the local scene. They eventually get a record deal. They release a few singles that were written by Henley, but it doesn't really go anywhere. Henley is determined to make it as a musician, though. So 1963, they form the band. 1964, they change their name. They get a record deal, I think in 1965. They stay together until 1969, when they just so happened to randomly meet Kenny Rogers. And he's like, I dig you guys. You guys got a good sound. Let's see what we can do. Kenny Rogers basically has them record a few singles. They're all prepped to release it, hit it big. They got Kenny Rogers behind it. When one of the founding members, and again, they have been in this band since they were like sophomores in high school. And this is 6 years later. One of the founding members, Jerry Surratt, is killed in a dirt bike accident right before they released their singles.
Jesus.
Jeez.
So for most people, we're talking like we're on high school bands, like the bond that you form with your high school band. You've been in that band for 6 years trying to make it happen. Kenny Rogers,
you're close.
the motherfucking
Yeah.
gambler. Yes, he wants to
Picks
put your
you up
songs
and-
out,
yeah.
and one of the guys dies. Most bands would basically say, that's it, we're done. I can't handle this anymore. They don't. They basically say, we're going to soldier on. And Rogers actually moves them out to LA, has them stay at his house, and gets them signed to Amos Records, and says, hey, we're going to put out our first album. They put out their first album, and through grinding it out in small Texas clubs, through the death of one of the founding members, they stay together. They put out their first album, and they break up because Don Henley has creative differences with one of the other guys.
No.
Yeah.
Foreshadowing.
Foreshadowing. Yeah. And before we move off of Kenny Rogers, because he's about to exit our story, I did just want to bring up this factoid that I heard the other day. I read this story online the other day. I can't independently verify it, but this sounds like one of my favorite fucking stories of all time. Apparently, not that long ago, Kenny Rogers, I mean, maybe like 10 or 15 years ago, Kenny Rogers was hired by some fucking hedge fund manager to play a private show. And he's playing the private show, and he plays the gambler, and the hedge fund manager is like, I want you to play it again. And Kenny's like, no, I'm not fucking playing the gambler again. And the guy's like, I will give you more money. Play the gambler again. So he plays the gambler again. He's like, I want to hear it again. It's like, I'm not fucking playing it again. It's like, I will give you more money. Play it again. Smash cut to Kenny Rogers has played the gambler 12 times in a row and earned an extra $4 million.
Holy
God.
And then the 13th time was too much. And he says, no, I'm not fucking doing it anymore. I have $4 million plus what you paid me to come here originally. I'm fucking done. I know when to fold them. I'm walking away.
Yeah. Here's the thing. Here's a question. I wonder if he said, "Show me the money." He's like, "Put the money on the table." Right?
The other question is like, you never count your money when you're sitting at the table. So how did he know he had $4 million?
I was gonna say, you got to know when to fold them, dude.
Oh, that's fucking ridiculous. Anyway,
I think that is an amazing story, but I think that is also a microcosm of what corporate gigs are like for these artists. Or if you fly to
Oof.
an Arab nation to play for some sheik or something like that, that's more or less what it's like, right?
yeah,
Do
they're
my
just
bidding.
like,
Yeah.
I have enough money to turn you into my puppet, and you tell me when it gets too degrading, but I'm gonna keep throwing money at you until it does. All right, so back to the 70s. It's 1971. Henley and Fry are friends. They had met the year before. Henley's out in the wind with a band that had been trying to make it for the last 8 years. They'd just broken up. Frey's part of a guitar duo that has a stupid name and no success. They need money and they need a creative direction. Enter Linda Ronstadt.
Wow.
Mhm.
This is
So-
like a who's who. By the way, I knew nothing about the Eagles' history, so this is fascinating. Thank you.
All right. Glad to see you didn't do any research, Adam.
Exactly.
So Ronstadt, she's going on tour in 1971 to promote her album Silk Purse, which, yeah, for the guys in the Eagles, that's the band you want to back up, Silk Purse. And so she gets Fry and Henley on board, along with a few other musicians, one of whom is Randy Meisner. And, Randy Meisner is a former member of Poco, which
Yes.
I
Love Poco.
honestly have never heard Poco. I use Poco as a punchline. I know
Oh, Jesus.
Messina was in Poco, but I'm not familiar enough with Poco to know their stuff. I just kind of,
Timothy B.
know.
Schmidt was also in Poco.
Messina, Meisner, and Timothy B. Schmidt in the same band?
oh,
Hey.
Are you sure? How did the stage contain them?
all that sex that they were exuding.
No.
So anyway, they're playing together. They're kind of gelling as a band, and basically, Don Henley and Glenn Fry go to Linda Ronstadt and they say, "Hey, listen, we want to start our own band. We're making money being your backup band, but we want to do our own thing." And by all accounts, Linda Ronstadt was like, "You should 1000% do that. I will help you as much as I can." Super cool about it. When they were like, "Yeah, we're just going to kind of ditch this project as soon as we're done making money on the tour." They did actually appear on an album of hers, but she was totally supportive of it. And in fact says, "I know a great guy that should be in your new band that you're trying to form. This guy named Bernie Ledden." And so she basically says, "I'm going to get Bernie Ledden to come and play a gig." They have a gig scheduled for Disneyland in like June or July. And she's like, "Yeah, I'll get him to come and play." That's the first time that Don Henley, Bernie Ledden, Randy Meisner, and Glenn Fry all play on stage together. And they all hit it off. Now, Bernie Ledden, for those who don't know, he's a guitar player, multi-instrumentalist, really anything with like a string and a pick he can play. He's one of those guys. He had been born in Minneapolis, but he moved to San Diego to pursue a music career or possibly just escape the brutality of Minneapolis winters. I don't know. I feel like if you grew up in Minneapolis and you in wintertime travel to San Diego, you're just like, I'm not getting back on that
I'm
plane.
never
There's no way I'm going back
going
to that.
back.
Are you kidding me? It's beautiful, and there's beautiful women here. So he's in a couple of bluegrass kind of countrified band. He moves to LA to get in on that burgeoning LA bluegrass countrified scene, and he eventually is asked to join a newly formed band called the Flying Burrito Brothers with Chris Hillman and Graham Parsons. We have covered the Flying Burrito Brothers, The Gilded Palace of Sin, on this podcast. That was episode 55 for anybody who's curious to go back and check that one out. I believe that was
Wow,
actually
that
one of
long
the ones
ago.
that Phil led. It was a long time ago.
Yeah.
Quite long, yes.
So Ledden is on Flying Burrito Brothers for 2 albums. They haven't really hit it big, and he kind of decides it's time to leave. He's been moonlighting, playing with Linda Ronstadt for a bit, and decides that, she put the bug in his ear about joining with Don Henley and Glenn Fry, and they decide that, yeah, I'm going to come and join that band. So we're finally here at the formation of the Eagles. Again, they insist that their name is just Eagles. They are wrong, and I will fight any of the surviving members. They come at me.
I like how in 1969 or 68, whenever this was, that the name Eagles was just sitting there waiting for bands
Still
to take
available.
it. Still available, yeah. Insane.
Well, we go back through the history of a lot of these bands. You see all their high school, college, post high school projects. It's all the something. All the names were still there. There's no the names available now. I remember, Rob, when we were like the Chop, we're like, that has to be taken. No, it's not taken. All right. It's one of the very few the names that's not already taken by somebody.
I think it's even accelerated since then because it's so easy to self-publish. So many more people have published music, and if you count that as being taken in quotes, then yeah, sure.
Right.
Yeah, when Rob and I were trying to put out the Ghost Beef album, we wanted to just call the project Ghost Beef. 2 published artists called Ghost Beef before
Are you
us.
kidding me?
Yes, which is ridiculous. And they
What?
both are not that great. No offense, guys. if you're
Oh,
listening.
shots fired.
It's different. You guys were not taking full advantage of the Ghost Beef name. Let's put it.
By developing lore.
Yes,
And
yes.
a
They were
whole
not
universe.
they were not meat based at all,
Right.
which is just a total miss.
Missed opportunity.
All righty. So it's 1971. These guys are all kind of known quantities. Mostly, though, it is Meisner and Ledin who are the known quantities. But they get a record contract pretty much right away. They play together on stage for the first time backing Linda Ronstadt in July 1971. And in September 1971, they get signed to Asylum Records. So they haven't really done anything at this point, but they get a record deal. And you definitely would not know from the direction that the control of the band went later on that it was Meisner and Ledin that were the guys that basically their names helped them get a record contract, because very quickly after Eagles form, it's Henley and Fry, and they are running the show. And they are, by all accounts, not super open to input. So basically, we're going to jump through a lot of their kind of recording projects up to Hotel California, but they get signed in 1971. Ends up being a really good move to sign them by Asylum because their self-titled debut yields 3 top 10 40 hits,
Wow.
including Take It Easy, Witchy Woman, and Peaceful Easy Feelin'. And
That's On the Border or Desperado?
that's just Eagles.
Just called
Self-titled.
Eagles. I think Tequila
Yeah.
Sunrise is on that one too.
Tequila Sunrise is not on that one. We're gonna get into it.
Oh,
Don't try to
okay,
correct me
all
on the research. I just did this shit. All right.
All right, all right. My bad.
All right. So you've just put out an album that has Take It Easy and Peaceful Easy Feeling on it. What's your move? You got to go out and tour. You got to promote this. Who do you team up with as the perfect band to complement Peaceful Easy Feeling and Take It Easy? You, of course, support Yes on their Close to the Edge tour, which is the most goddamn ridiculous mismatch I could possibly think of. Just unrelenting, in-your-face prog rock. And the band that's opening up is just like, well, I'm running down the road trying to loosen my load.
Also, like, they couldn't have sort of like different aesthetics and mythology sort of like
Yeah.
intertwined in the music. Like, couldn't be more different.
Yeah.
If anyone's curious, just put on the track Close to the Edge, which is the first track on that album, for 30 seconds, and you'll get a sense of how anxious it makes you feel.
Yes. It's certainly not a peaceful, easy feeling.
Yeah,
at
yeah. And then
all.
maybe jumping to Take It Easy and see where you're at.
All right. So they tour with Yes. By all accounts, it's pretty successful. They released their second album, Desperado. They're sticking with that country inflected folk rock sound. It's very evident on their first album. And Desperado is also a success, with Tequila Sunrise and Desperado becoming signature Eagles songs. Tequila Sunrise being one of the singles off of that. Desperado, I don't actually believe was a single off of that album, which is odd because it has become one of those songs that you immediately associate with the Eagles. And I feel like people who aren't even fans of 70s music know Desperado. It's
Right.
I don't know if it was on the movie soundtrack or something, but it got
It's
real
become like a karaoke classic, I feel like, which is a hard lane to predict for.
It's a
Yeah.
real tearjerker ballad,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
great
Rob, if
lyrics.
you've talked about it, it might be in the American Songbook.
Yeah, I think it belongs there. In fact,
Yeah.
astute listeners might recall we did a Guilty Pleasures episode, And Phil said that Desperado was a guilty pleasure, and we all made
Oh.
fun of him endlessly because it's just a legitimately good song.
Oh yeah, I love
There's nothing
Desperado.
guilty about it.
There's nothing guilty about it, Phil.
You like an amazing song, you fool. Like,
All right. So they released Desperado, and it becomes more successful than their self-titled debut eventually. But upon initial release, it actually is less successful than their first album. It's still very well regarded. So they are trucking along. They're having success. They're not superstars, but they're having success. They're touring the world, also getting into drugs. Now, for now, it seems like it's just the usual 70s rock star coke splurge, nothing too serious, but the coke might come up later. I don't know. Might come up later in the story. We'll see. So they're looking to record their third album, and they kind of decide that they want to get away from the sound that they've been doing previously, that country rock sound. They feel they've been a little pigeonholed into that, and they want to bring in a little bit more of a rock influence. And so they decide that they're going to bring in one Don Felder on guitars and pedal steel, because nothing says let's move away from country rock like bringing a pedal steel player into your band. But interesting, Don Felder had known Bernie Leadon since they were young. They both went to the same high school. And as the story goes, Leadon is backstage while the Eagles are opening for Yes. Felder comes to visit him. Felder ends up jamming with them for a bit, and he impresses them enough that they say, hey, why don't you come? We're recording our new album. Why don't you come put some solos and some slide guitar on a couple of songs? So Felder actually appears on A Good Day in Hell and on Already Gone. He provides the solo on Already Gone, which is on the Border, which is the third album that is released by the Eagles. And eventually they're pretty impressed. And right after, the day after that recording session, they're like, you should just join the band. Why don't you just be a full member of the band?
This band needs more guitar players, obviously, and more guys named Don.
It is also important that they say a full member of the band to him, because this is a contention that comes up later where they're sort of like, no, we didn't say full member. In terms of money
for
or anything
sure.
like that.
For
We
sure.
just said you're a member, but
he's
member
getting
can be a
paid
lot
in
of
guitar
things.
strings.
Already Gone rips. And that record On the Border has a great version of Old 55 on it, the Tom Waits song.
Yeah.
If anyone's unfamiliar.
Yeah, it's a good cover.
Yep. So, all right, they're trucking along. They record their fourth album, One of These Nights. And that's the one that really makes them international superstars. One of These Nights, the title track, goes to number 1. Their second single, Lion Eyes, goes to number 2. And the third single, Take It to the Limit, goes to number 4. So number 1, number 2, and a number 4 release single off of your album. That's pretty damn good. Life is good for the Eagles at this point.
Life is good. Was that a foreshadowing of what comes next?
Well, life is good unless, of course, you are Bernie Leadon, who is very not happy with the direction that the band is taking, and also with the fact that Fry and Henley are taking over complete control of the band. I believe there's a quote that it comes from Joe Walsh later where he says, you're just pumping gas at the Henley gas station. And it's basically like it's just your goddamn job. It's like a minimum wage job. You just do what he tells you to do all the time.
Oh, man.
Leadon is not happy about this. He kind of pictured that at the beginning of the band, he and Meisner were the pros. They were the ones who had some success. They thought that they were the mature leaders of the band. And Fry and Henley, especially when they started teaming up on Desperado as the primary songwriters, really started exerting complete iron-fisted control over the band. And he was not happy with it. He did not like the direction that they were going in. And it's manifesting itself into lots and lots of fights with Henley and Fry. And from the sound of it, some physical fights with them as well. Very famous story where Glenn Fry is like talking to everybody in the band about this is what we're going to do next. This is the direction we're going to go. And Bernie Leadon just walks up and pours a beer on his head. And it's like, fuck you. And
that's awesome.
It kind of all comes to a head. And in late 1975, Leadon officially out of the band. They try to keep it under wraps for a while, but they're big stars at this time. And they're like, well, why is Leadon like doing other projects and working with other people? And they're like, all right, fine. He's fucking out of the band. So they got to replace that guitar player. They don't have enough guitar players in this band. So
There's
they,
only 5 at this point.
so they eventually get Joe Walsh, who is a veteran of much more rock-oriented groups. Like he was in James Gang. He's a solo artist in his own right. He's way more rock and roll. So much so that Don Henley is actually kind of worried that he's like too rock for the band. He's too hard for the band. But he's actually been friends with the band for a while. So
I'm
it's a
pretty
natural
sure it came up on a very early podcast that he gave Jimmy Page his Les Paul.
Mm.
So like
Yeah.
that's how rock and roll this guy is. He's like, hey, Jimmy Page, you're playing that guitar. Take my guitar.
Try
This
one of
one's
these.
better for you. Yeah,
He's
try
the
one of
real
these.
You know how
He
rock and,
is.
you know how rock and roll he is his voice has been permanently altered by the use of cocaine.
Yep. And so has his brain. I don't know if you guys remember
Yeah.
the very famous Rock and Roll Jeopardy
Uh-huh.
episode that had both Mark McGrath from Sugar Ray and Joe Walsh on it, where Mark McGrath just absolutely destroyed
Destroyed, right?
everybody, and
It was-
including getting the answer correct, where the answer was Joe Walsh. And Joe Walsh is standing right next to him, and he's kind of looking at him like, "You're not going to take this one, okay? It's Joe Walsh. It's fucking you, goddamn burnout."
Dude, that's awesome.
But this is the 70s. He's still in his prime, and he is like, all right, I would love to join your band. You guys are clearly very successful. This makes a ton of sense. And they are getting ready to basically gel this new member and start making a new album. This is like late 1975. They're like, all right, let's start putting some songs together. Forward looking. We're a band that is looking into the future. We want to start making some new songs. However, at this time, Irving Azov, who was their manager, completely without consulting the band, goes ahead and packages a greatest hits album and puts it out in February of 1976. They did not know it was going to be released. He didn't
Without
consult
telling them?
at all.
Holy
He
crap.
released their greatest hits 1971 to 1975, and the band is fucking pissed about it. They're like, this is just some cheap fucking money grab from this goddamn record company parasite. I hate this guy. And then
And then the paycheck started rolling in.
oh my God. Yes, it starts selling like goddamn hotcakes. Okay, so it's released
man.
in February of 1976. It hits #1 in March 76, and it stays on the charts for 365 weeks.
Damn.
365 fucking weeks. It
Is that
stays
5
on the
years?
charts.
6 years?
That
Over
is-
6 years?
It's like over. It's like almost 7 years. It stays. On the charts.
Jesus Christ.
Turn up the Eagles. The neighbors are listening.
Oh, and the Eagles are turned up at this point. But
When
there's a
else has
weird
that
thing-
happened? When else has that happened in rock history, when a band puts out a successful greatest hits album and then goes on to have their greatest hit after that?
I don't think that's ever happened before, because it was a premature greatest hits album. That's
Right.
the issue.
Right.
Is it was premature to put that out. They're like, we've only been a band for like 4 years, man. Like we're still making music. I was a little blown away by that, but also this makes a weird dynamic, okay? Because you have right now in the band, you have Glenn Fry, you have Don Henley, you have Randy Messina, you have Don Felder, and you have Joe Walsh. And all of this money starts pouring in from this greatest hits album that is going primarily to Don Henley and to Glenn Fry.
Fry,
And
right.
Messina's getting some of it because he's got Take It to the Limit on there. But-
Meisner.
Meisner, not Messina. Meisner is getting some of it because he's got Take It to the Limit. But Joe Walsh and Don Fry, Joe Walsh and Don Felder are really not getting that money at all. So they're getting like the splashback experience of being in the Eagles, but there is serious amounts of money coming in. that
Because we're
is going
talking
nuts.
millions of
Millions,
dollars that those guys are getting.
millions of
And
dollars.
Joe Walsh and again Meisner are just kind of like what, getting a stipend once a month or something like
No,
it's, yeah.
Meisner's making money because Meisner's
Okay.
got Take It to the Limit. And so
Okay,
that's,
okay. Ah,
that's
right.
a song that he penned, and that's on the greatest hits, and he's making money off of that. But Felder and
Felder, thank you. Sorry,
Yeah.
Felder. Yeah.
Felder and Walsh are really not getting that money at all. So money is going to come up as a big part of the reason why the Eagles break up, which we're not really going to get into. But either way, like they're making a shit ton of money, but then they're also getting intense pressure to put out their next album. And honestly, like you look back on, you think Irving Azoff did a dick move. Releases the greatest hits, doesn't tell the band. But they could not have been more perfectly positioned to take advantage of the success of that album because they had already basically written all of Hotel California by this point. And so the album is released in February. They go into the studio in March to try to start recording Hotel California. And then as they're recording it, this greatest hits is just exploding in popularity. And it's not like, oh my God, what are we going to do to follow it up? They're like, we're basically done. We can follow it up kind of whenever. So it was really fortuitous to them because Hotel California, it's recorded in between March and June of 1976, and it is released in December 8th of 1976. And to say that the market was primed for it is an extreme understatement. Again, it goes platinum in 1 week. You do not go platinum in 1 week unless there
Crazy.
are pre-orders. There
Yeah.
are people who are eagerly awaiting the release of your album.
Like literally lined up.
Camping at the record shop.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's American platinum, not Moroccan platinum or whatever we were talking about a couple weeks ago.
Dude, yeah, that is just in America. And to be fair, the Eagles are a very American band. They are out west, countrified, kind of, the American spirit. That's their vibe. I can see why they are the highest selling album in America, but not the highest selling album in the world, because Thriller is still the highest selling album in the world. Thriller is more universally palatable, I think, than any Eagles albums are. But we have now gotten to the point where they have recorded and they are releasing Hotel California. Let's start talking about some individual tracks.